Hi, I'm Rochelle Clausen,
And I'm Nicole Trombley.
and we are so excited to introduce our new anatomy column in Massage and Bodywork magazine called Anatomy for Touch.
As massage therapists, we crave an anatomy education that informs our touch. So beyond muscle charts, nerves, bones, we want to know about the stuff in between. We want the whole picture.
And that's why in our column, we're going to highlight some maybe slightly lesser known anatomy that is extremely relevant to massage therapists. We're going to help you understand where they live, what they feel like, what they look like, and how they relate to the tissues around them.
Enjoy this video segment on the skin ligaments from our Anatomy Lovers ebooks.
And don't forget to check out the digital extras at abmp.com/anatomy.
Enjoy. We are starting our journey into the subcutaneous tissues. And subcutaneous tissues are also known as the hypodermis, also known as the superficial fascia layer, subcutaneous adipose tissue layers. We like the term subcutis, following some of our research heroines, calling it the subcutis. So by subcutis, we're talking about those the layer between the skin and the deeper fascia that contains all of our subcutaneous adipose tissue. Up on the screen right now, we've got our anatomy art card of the month. And this is a picture that we took with our microscope in a dissection we did in the lab. And so I think it's magnified just about 50 times. And as I was saying in the introduction, these skin ligaments help create the architecture of all of our subcutaneous tissue between the skin and our fascia, our deeper fascia and muscle body. And that's what we're really spending time today talking about. The skin ligaments, but more so how they help create that three-dimensional architecture of that tissue. And for us as body workers, we're obsessed with this layer because once you start really playing with it and looking at it and exploring it in the lab, then when you go back into your clinical practice and start working on, or just your loved ones even, and start touching bodies and you start playing with that subcutaneous tissue, you start really, you start rethinking palpation a tiny bit about what are you touching? What are you touching under that skin? And for me, it's been just really taking my palpation skills next level. All right, and now Michelle's going to take us through the architecture.
You may have seen like these cross sections to try to give you an idea of a schematic of what it is that the subcutis and what it looks like in relationship skin down to depth. I have to say they've always left me flat because once I've been in the lab and seeing things with my own eyes and consistencies that you see, to see it simplified into a cartoon that really oversimplifies the drawing bugs the heck out of me. So we wanted to use in our last anatomy zine, which is the story that we tell with each one of our e-boxes. We wanted to give you kind of a schematic to give you kind of an organizational thought process around it. And we couldn't use the one that was there because it was copyrighted, obviously. And then all of a sudden I was like, I can make my own. And so I did. And, this is untouched. These are images of real tissue, but put into kind of a schematic gives you a sense of it that makes it a little bit more, quick to comprehend in your brain. So if you can see my little green dot on the screen here, and if you can't, you can just follow from the top to the bottom. We're going to start with the epidermis. The epidermis is really thin. With the naked eye, you can see a distinction between the epidermis and the dermis. The dermis is the thicker part of the skin layer, and the thickness of the dermis and the epidermis varies greatly throughout the body. You can imagine places where it's definitely thicker, palms of the hand, sole of the foot, the back, where you'll find it quite a bit thinner. Also in the ventral surfaces of the body, the inner part of the arm, the inner part of the thigh, the face and the eyelids. There's a variation that you'll find throughout. Anytime you kind of go like that, I'll look to see if you want to say something because you can feel free to interject at any point. As we continue down, though, the really cool thing that we see is our focus of this box, which is the retinaculum cutis, also called the skin ligaments. And can you see how it almost looks as if they're rooting down? It's almost like roots of a tree or a plant that continue down. The skin and the subcutis are not peelable. They are not separate layers. They do not have a gliding relationship. They are deeply connected. And in fact, when you're in a regular dissection class that's not ours, they're usually taken off as one section together. And that's because it's easy to do. It's pretty difficult to actually separate the dermis from the subcutis with a scalpel. The bond is so strong. And if you've been in our workshops, or if you've been maybe in Gil Headley's workshop, or somewhere where you've been studying the body as from a fascial lens in kind of layers or tissue distinctions, you'll know that the scalpel dulls extremely quickly when you're cutting skin away from dermis, because you're cutting through so much tough collagen fiber. You have to change your blades frequently throughout the day, maybe after 30 minutes or less. Whereas when you're doing deep tissue dissection, or you're working through the superficial fascia, you may use the same blade for the whole day or half the day. So that's a fascinating kind of point of it. So continuing down, you'll see how it's rooting. It's the white fibers you see through the yellow. The yellow color on that layer is from our fluffy adipose lobules. And adipose lobules are made from adipose tissue, and the little cells, the little fat cells, are even smaller, but they form together to make these lobules, which are then separated by septa, or walls of fascia, which are the skin ligaments that connect it down to the deeper layers. This first top layer of the cake is the superficial adipose tissue. We just call it SAT because that is a lot of syllables. But you can call it superficial, meaning surface, adipose, meaning fat, tissue, it's a tissue. But the SAT is this first top layer that's in your subcutis. This line that I've drawn is just to emphasize a line that exists in reality, but is a little bit faint. And so I wanted to clarify it by just putting a block of color across it. That's the superficial fascia membrane. We'll get into this a little bit more detail later, but this is by some considered the true superficial fascia. When you're using the definition of fascia as a dissectable sheet, sheath, or other, I guess the actual is, or other dissectable aggregation of connective tissue rich in collagen, that's considered a true fascia. It has to be a dissectable sheet or sheath. This is a dissectable sheet or sheath. It has more elastin in it. It has more of a, it's like in our model here, it has more of that center section. There's more fibers that run through it, and fewer of these lobules and walls. It varies throughout the body as well, but it's very, very distinct in certain areas. And we call it the superficial fascia membrane, so that we don't confuse ourselves as to whether we're talking about superficial fascia as a full layer, or I'm going to just turn my phone on airplane. I feel like our connection might be dragging a little bit. As opposed to superficial fascia, all of it, because we're talking about all of it when we talk about it. We'll distinguish what we mean. If we mean the membrane, we'll say superficial fascia membrane, or SFM. Below that, you'll find the deep adipose tissue. And from the picture, you can see how it has a looser organization, and it seems a little bit like more oval shapes instead of these column shapes. It tends to have more capacity for this kind of movement. It slides. It's a kind of interface that has a little bit more play between the superficial fascia membrane and the deep fascia. Then you see a totally different kind of fascia. We won't be talking about it much today. That's the deep fascia, recognizable by its silvery, shiny, organized, patterned, strapping tape-like lines of collagen. It's a thinner tissue, and it's what you will come to on the limbs before you get to the muscles. On the torso, it's what creates the lumbar dorsal fascia and the rectus sheath, as well as some of the denser areas of fascia on the torso. Then we come to the epimysium. Every muscle is covered in its own fascia. This is that thin sausage wrapping kind of wrapping that's on muscle, and it's more membranous, and it's completely adherent to individual muscles, whereas the deep fascia tends to wrap groups of muscles. So there you have it, architecture of subcutaneous tissue.